Her ex-husband tried to hide money in court, but she was already one step ahead. Rebecca stood at the kitchen counter, silently stirring a pot of untouched soup that had long gone cold. The clock ticked past 11 p.m. Jonathan still hadn't returned. The silence in the house felt louder than any argument. This had become routine, her sitting alone, waiting for a man who barely acknowledged her existence anymore. His late nights used to come with excuses, work emergencies, networking dinners. Lately, he didn't even bother to explain. She stopped asking. But tonight, something in her broke. It wasn't the loneliness, nor the cold dinner. It was the moment she realized she didn't care anymore. That, she thought, was more terrifying than the anger she used to feel. When the front door finally creaked open, Jonathan didn't look at her. He smelled of cologne that wasn't his, and his shirt was unbuttoned more than usual. Rebecca said nothing as he passed through the kitchen without a word. He didn't ask about dinner. He didn't even glance at her. He walked straight upstairs, the sound of his footsteps heavy on the wooden stairs. She looked down at her hands that once wore his ring with pride, and wiped them with a dish towel, then dropped it on the floor. Her chest tightened, but not with sadness. It was clarity. Her marriage was over. Not because of some explosive fight, but because she had finally stopped trying. In the following days, Rebecca paid attention to the details. There was a receipt in his pants pocket for an expensive hotel spa. A shade of lipstick on his collar, rosewood, not a color she ever wore. A strange perfume lingered on his coat, the kind with a musky sweetness, nothing like the crisp, clean scent she preferred. Every small clue was a whisper, pushing her toward a truth she no longer had the energy to deny. She began to question if she had been too blind or just too hopeful. She had once imagined they'd grow old together. But now, she only saw a man she barely recognized. One morning, while doing laundry, Rebecca found a gold bracelet tucked inside one of his jackets, delicate, feminine, and clearly not hers. Her hands trembled as she held it. There was no note, no card, just the weight of betrayal resting in her palm. She didn't cry. She didn't scream. Instead, she placed it carefully in a drawer. From that moment, she decided, if he could be discreet, so could she. But unlike him, she wouldn't sneak behind his back. She would walk out the front door, with dignity, and with a plan. Rebecca didn't confront Jonathan that evening. Instead, she set the dinner table as usual, poured herself a glass of water, and made light conversation about their daughter's school recital. Jonathan responded with vague grunts and glanced at his phone more often than her eyes. She smiled, not because she was happy, but because she had accepted something irreversible. It wasn't a surrender. It was the calm before a decision. She didn't want a scene. She wanted strategy. She wanted justice. After dinner, she went upstairs, opened her laptop, and searched for family attorneys in her city. Reviews, credentials, photos, she studied them all with the focus of a surgeon preparing for an operation. Her eyes stopped on one name, a woman named Marissa Caldwell, known for specializing in complex divorce cases, particularly those involving hidden assets. Rebecca clicked on her website and filled out the consultation form without hesitation. That night, while Jonathan slept on the far edge of the bed facing the wall, Rebecca stared at the ceiling, no longer wondering if he loved her. She was done asking questions. She was ready for answers. Rebecca's phone buzzed just before lunch the next day. It was Marissa's office confirming a time for their first consultation. The woman's voice was calm, professional, and encouraging. "Bring anything you think may be useful." Bank statements, business filings, unusual expenses, anything that felt off, she said. Rebecca thanked her and immediately began pulling together everything she had. Old emails, receipts, scanned statements from joint accounts, and pictures of the jewelry and travel items she never received. Her hands moved swiftly. For the first time in months, she felt like she was moving forward, not just surviving. At the consultation, Marissa greeted Rebecca with a firm handshake and a sharp gaze. She listened without interruption as Rebecca spoke. "He's not violent. He's just cruelly indifferent. And I think he's hiding money. Maybe through his company," she said. Marissa nodded, scribbled notes, and asked a few pointed questions. "Does he own the business outright? Are there silent partners? Have there been sudden transfers or liquidity changes?" Rebecca answered as best she could. By the end of the hour, Marissa leaned back and said, "We'll start quietly. If he's hiding money, we'll find it. But if we do this right, he won't see it coming." Rebecca left the office not with fear, but with fuel. It was a Thursday when Rebecca finally told Jonathan. The sun was just starting to dip behind the trees outside their living room window. Their daughter was staying at her friend's house for the night, Rebecca made sure of that. She sat calmly on the couch as he walked in, loosening his tie, looking bored. "We need to talk," she said. Jonathan raised an eyebrow, clearly annoyed, but sat anyway. She didn't falter. "I've filed for divorce. The papers will be delivered tomorrow. You'll hear from my attorney by the end of the week." Jonathan laughed. He didn't yell. He didn't cry. He laughed, short, dismissive, arrogant. "You? Filing for divorce? You won't last a month without me. You don't even work. Good luck getting anything out of me." He stood up, shaking his head. "You'll come crawling back." Rebecca didn't flinch. She looked him in the eye and replied, "You'll be surprised what I'm capable of." He walked upstairs, slamming the door behind him. Rebecca sat there in silence, her hands folded neatly on her lap. She felt a small tremor in her fingers, not from fear, but from anticipation. He thought she was weak. That was his first mistake. A few days later, Rebecca attended a casual brunch at a mutual friend's home, a gathering she had almost skipped. But curiosity got the better of her. As she walked in, she immediately spotted Jonathan at the far end of the patio, seated beside a younger woman with striking red lipstick and an expensive handbag. As if sensing her arrival, he turned and smirked. "Loud enough for half the table to hear," he said, surprised she could afford to show her face. "Maybe she's trying to find a new wallet to latch onto." The woman beside him laughed too loudly, her eyes scanning Rebecca from head to toe, clearly judging her modest outfit. The insult stung, but Rebecca said nothing. She poured herself a cup of coffee, holding it steady despite the tremble in her fingers. It wasn't just the insult, it was the way everyone else pretended not to hear, shifting uncomfortably or sipping their drinks to avoid involvement. She excused herself early, walking out with a head held high but a heart that beat with both shame and fire. In the car, she stared at her own reflection in the mirror. The old Rebecca would have cried. The new Rebecca took a breath and whispered, "Just wait." Later that week, during a tense phone call regarding preliminary divorce terms, Jonathan threw a new weapon her way. "I'm going to file for full custody," he said coldly. "You don't even work. The court's going to see that you're not capable of raising our daughter alone." Rebecca's hand tightened around the receiver, but her voice remained calm. You're not doing this for her. You're doing this to punish me. He didn't deny it. I'll get a better lawyer. One who knows how to win. You'll be lucky if you get weekends, he added with venom. The conversation ended with the beep of disconnection, but the sting lingered long after. Rebecca sat in the silence of her living room, the weight of his threat pressing down on her chest. She wasn't just fighting for justice anymore. She was fighting for her daughter. Her lawyer had warned her this might happen. Custody was often used as leverage. But Rebecca knew her daughter needed her, not Jonathan's money, not his shallow lifestyle, but her mother. She wiped her tears and began compiling school reports, medical records, and every document that showed who had really been doing the parenting. Rebecca met with Marissa again the next morning. Sitting across from her in the quiet office, she explained the custody threat. Marissa nodded, unfazed. We'll handle it. I've seen this tactic before. But let's focus on the financials for now. I have someone I want you to meet. She introduced Rebecca to Colin, a forensic accountant with a calm demeanor and razor-sharp attention to detail. He asked questions she had never thought to ask. Has he recently moved money between accounts? Opened any new companies in the last year? Bought anything large under someone else's name? Rebecca handed over everything she had: bank statements, copies of their tax filings, receipts from the last 12 months. Colin's eyes scanned quickly, highlighting dates and amounts. There's definitely something here, he said. Large transfers to what looks like a vendor account, but there's no actual service listed. Could be a shell company. We'll trace it. She watched him work with a mix of awe and anxiety. Each paper was a puzzle piece, and Rebecca knew the picture they formed could change everything. For the first time, she wasn't just reacting, she was investigating. A week later, Colin called her in. His voice was calm but carried the edge of urgency. He's moving assets, Rebecca. Slowly, quietly, but deliberately. He spread out documents showing wire transfers to what appeared to be a consulting firm overseas. But it's not a real business. It's a cover. The funds end up in an offshore account under a different name, likely an alias or someone he trusts. Rebecca's throat went dry. She had suspected dishonesty, but this was fraud. Marissa leaned in. He's preparing to claim he's broke. We need to build the case now, while the money trail still exists. Rebecca nodded slowly, absorbing the weight of it all. This wasn't just about hiding wealth, it was about deception under oath, manipulation of the system, and deliberate harm to her and their child's future. Marissa explained their next move: they would subpoena records, but timing mattered. If Jonathan caught wind of their findings too soon, he'd cover his tracks. He thinks you're unprepared. That's our advantage, she said. Rebecca exhaled and said, then let's make sure he never sees it coming. The next piece of the puzzle arrived by accident. While dropping off paperwork at her lawyer's office, Rebecca recognized a woman stepping out of the elevator, slim, neatly dressed, with an uncertain smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. It was Lila, Jonathan's former assistant. Rebecca hadn't seen her since she was abruptly let go months ago, supposedly for downsizing. Their eyes met, and Lila hesitated, then approached. Rebecca, can we talk for a moment? Curious and cautious, Rebecca agreed, and they sat in a quiet cafe nearby. Lila fidgeted with her cup before speaking. I wasn't just let go. I was pushed out because I asked too many questions. She leaned in. He was moving money. I didn't know what at first, but when I started noticing inconsistencies in invoices, payments going to strange accounts, he panicked. Fired me overnight. Rebecca stared in stunned silence as Lila continued. I kept records. I didn't know what to do with them, until now. If you're fighting him in court, I want to help. Rebecca's heart pounded. She had just found an unexpected ally, and maybe, just maybe, the key to winning everything. Lila opened her bag slowly and pulled out a small flash drive. Her fingers trembled slightly as she handed it to Rebecca. Emails, bank drafts, internal memos, everything he tried to erase. I saved copies before I was locked out. Rebecca held it in her palm, feeling the weight of its contents. Her breath caught as Lila added, there are voice recordings too. Meetings he thought were off the record. Rebecca couldn't believe what she was hearing. She had walked into that cafe for a brief chat, and was walking out with a weapon that could change everything in the courtroom. They parted ways with a quiet hug, neither fully understanding the power of what had just been exchanged. Rebecca rushed to Marissa's office, where the legal team immediately began reviewing the contents. Emails detailed money being funneled through fake companies, payments labeled as consultant to dummy vendors, and offshore accounts under aliases. One recording captured Jonathan laughing, saying, "She'll walk away with pennies, and I'll still have my millions. Let her try to prove it." Marissa looked up from her screen, eyes sharp. This isn't just hiding money. It's perjury waiting to happen. We're going to dismantle him. That night, Rebecca sat at her kitchen table staring at the flash drive case. It felt almost surreal, proof of every doubt, every sleepless night, every moment she questioned her instincts. With one tiny object, the truth was no longer a whisper. It was a shout. Her hands brushed over the drive again and again, not out of uncertainty, but resolve. This wasn't about revenge anymore. This was about exposing the truth in full daylight. She realized something else too. For the first time since the separation, she felt powerful. The next morning, Rebecca met with Marissa and Colin to strategize. We can't show our cards yet, Marissa cautioned. But this will be our hammer when he lies under oath. Colin nodded, adding, let him walk into the courtroom confident. The more arrogant he is, the harder he'll fall. They planned every detail, from how to submit the evidence, to who would corroborate it. Lila agreed to testify if needed. The game had shifted. Rebecca wasn't just surviving the storm anymore, she was standing in its center, ready to redirect it. Weeks passed in quiet preparation. Jonathan continued his show of bravado, posting photos with his new girlfriend, flaunting his lifestyle as if the divorce was a mere footnote. He made no attempt to hide his condescension during brief legal meetings. She'll be lucky to get the car, he had once whispered loud enough for Rebecca to hear. But she stayed composed, offering no reaction. Every smirk of his added fuel to her strategy. The more he underestimated her, the more power she gained. Marissa filed motions precisely timed to avoid alerting Jonathan's team to what was coming. Quiet subpoenas, slow pressure, coordinated with Colin's findings. The shell companies were exposed one by one. Offshore transactions were traced, revealing aliases that matched Jonathan's old business partners. Marissa smirked during one of the meetings. He built this web so carefully, but forgot that lies leave footprints. Rebecca listened in silence, her focus sharpening. Every insult, every humiliation, it was all leading here. The week before trial, Jonathan's lawyer contacted Rebecca's team with a smirk of a settlement offer, barely enough to cover childcare, let alone long-term needs. He's offering less because he claims he's broke, Marissa explained. Of course he does. Let him play poor. We'll remind the court just how rich he really is. Rebecca reviewed the offer, then calmly declined. She knew accepting meant letting him win. And after everything, she wasn't just fighting for herself. She was fighting for every woman who had been told to stay quiet. At the pretrial conference, Jonathan walked in with that familiar arrogance, tailored suit, expensive watch, smirk etched into his face. He barely glanced at Rebecca, instead whispering something to his attorney and laughing. Marissa noticed and leaned toward Rebecca. Let him laugh. He's playing checkers. We're playing chess. As they left the courtroom that day, Rebecca didn't look back. The silence between them wasn't awkward anymore, it was strategic. The courtroom was quiet as proceedings began. The judge, stern and sharp-eyed, wasted no time. Jonathan's team opened with a rehearsed speech about financial hardship, economic downturn, and dwindling assets. He has nothing left, the lawyer said with exaggerated concern. And yet he's doing all he can to offer support to his family. Rebecca watched as Jonathan nodded solemnly, hands folded, eyes cast downward in theatrical humility. To anyone unfamiliar with the truth, he might have seemed sincere. Marissa took notes silently but didn't object. Rebecca knew the plan. Let him dig his own hole. Her heart pounded, but her face stayed calm. She thought about her daughter, about Lila, about every bill she paid alone for the past year. Let him lie, she thought. Let the judge hear every word. Because when it's our turn, the truth won't just come out, it will thunder through this courtroom. She gripped the table edge, steadying herself. The storm was about to begin. The second day in court was colder, not because of the weather, but because of the way Jonathan's voice sliced through the silence. Under oath, he painted Rebecca as lazy and manipulative. She's never worked. She didn't contribute to my business. She only spent and complained, he said with a smug expression. A few people in the courtroom exchanged uncomfortable glances, but Jonathan didn't flinch. To him, this wasn't just testimony, it was revenge served cold. Rebecca kept her eyes locked on the judge, refusing to look at Jonathan. Inside, she was burning. Not because of his lies, but because of how rehearsed they were. He had said these things to her before, behind closed doors, during arguments designed to break her spirit. Now he repeated them in public, thinking it would crush her. But this time, the audience was different. And soon, so would be the outcome. Marissa stood calmly and objected to the character attacks. Your Honor, we request the witness stay focused on the financial facts of the case. The judge nodded. Mr. Preston, this is not a forum for emotional grievances. Focus on your financial disclosures. Jonathan shifted in his seat, visibly annoyed, but obeyed. His lawyer guided him back to the numbers, claims of low income, declining profits, and a business on the brink of collapse. As he rattled off losses and deficits, Marissa took careful notes. Colin sat behind them, quietly highlighting sections of documents. Rebecca glanced at him and saw the faintest of smirks. That alone gave her comfort. Let Jonathan spin his story. Let him build the stage. Because when their turn came, everything he said would crumble under the weight of the truth, and there would be no script to save him. When Marissa began her cross-examination, her tone was surgical. Mr. Preston, can you confirm this email dated March 12th, sent from your company's account to a firm registered in the Cayman Islands? Jonathan looked at the paper in front of him, suddenly blinking faster. I don't recall. Marissa pressed further. And this transaction for $140,000, what service exactly did this consulting firm provide? He fumbled, glanced at his lawyer. It was a marketing initiative. Overseas branding. The courtroom remained dead silent. Marissa let the moment settle, then slid a new document forward. And yet, we found no contract, no deliverables, and the firm was dissolved 6 days later. The judge narrowed his eyes. Jonathan shifted again. Your Honor, Marissa continued, we intend to prove that this was not an isolated incident. This pattern repeats across several fabricated companies. We request time to submit further documentation. Rebecca watched Jonathan's face tighten. The rope he had tied around others was slowly wrapping around him. On the third day of trial, the atmosphere shifted as Lila entered the courtroom. Calm, composed, dressed modestly but with quiet strength. She took the stand and introduced herself. I was Mr. Preston's assistant for nearly 4 years. I managed communications, scheduling, and internal documentation. Marissa asked her to describe why she left. Because I discovered irregularities, payments to entities that didn't exist, instructions to falsify memos, and emails Jonathan told me to delete permanently. Jonathan's lawyer objected, but the judge allowed her to continue. Did you comply with his requests? Marissa asked. No, Lila answered firmly. I backed up everything first. I didn't trust him. Not after the way he spoke about manipulating the system. Marissa handed her a printed email. Can you confirm this was written by Mr. Preston? Lila glanced once and nodded. Yes. He told me directly, let her fight. By the time she gets to court, I'll be 5 steps ahead. A murmur rippled through the courtroom. Marissa took a brief pause, then played an audio recording from the USB. Jonathan's voice echoed through the courtroom, she thinks she'll get half. She's out of her mind. I buried the money so deep they'll never trace it. Let her cry to the judge, I'll walk out smiling. A gasp rose from the back rows. The judge banged his gavel. Order. This will not become a circus. But the damage was done. Jonathan's mask had cracked, and everyone had seen behind it. Jonathan turned pale, visibly sweating, his composure shattered. His lawyer leaned in, whispering furiously, but Jonathan was frozen. Rebecca didn't move. She had no need to celebrate. The truth was louder than anything she could have said. The judge looked at Marissa. Is this part of a larger collection of evidence? Marissa nodded. It is. And there's more if needed. The judge leaned back in his chair, silent for a moment, then said, we will resume tomorrow. And Mr. Preston, you are reminded, you are under oath. The next morning, the courtroom was quieter than before, as if the air had thickened with the weight of what had been exposed. Rebecca sat still, her eyes fixed on the judge. Marissa stood, calm as ever, and requested permission to present one more item. Your Honor, with the court's approval, we'd like to submit digital evidence containing additional financial inconsistencies and further voice recordings. The judge nodded, gesturing for the clerk to receive the flash drive. Jonathan's lawyer stiffened, clearly blindsided. As the USB was inserted into the courtroom monitor, the screen filled with spreadsheets, followed by audio clips. One played Jonathan's voice saying, the dummy vendors were just a shell. The money goes to a trust. My cousin signs for it. Totally clean. The courtroom, once skeptical, was now leaning forward. The judge stared hard at Jonathan. Mr. Preston, you'll have the opportunity to respond. But know this, what I've just heard suggests intentional concealment. Rebecca didn't flinch. The walls Jonathan had built so carefully were cracking with every word he once thought no one would ever hear. Then came the final blow, a short video clip, low quality but clear enough. Jonathan, seated at a rooftop bar, clinked glasses with a man off camera. "She'll be walking out of that courtroom with nothing," he bragged, eyes gleaming. "I've shifted half my assets. She wants war? I've already won." Laughter echoed. The man off camera asked, "And your kid?" Jonathan replied, "I'll pretend I care, makes me look better." Judges eat that up. The courtroom gasped again. Rebecca felt her hands tighten in her lap, not in fear, but in heartbreak. The judge's face hardened. "Mr. Preston, you are now under inquiry for potential perjury and fraudulent concealment of marital assets. Your conduct will be investigated further by the court." Jonathan tried to speak, but his lawyer gently pulled him back, whispering furiously. The judge turned to Rebecca's table. "Ms. Caldwell, submit full copies of the digital evidence into record. This court will not tolerate manipulation of the legal process." Rebecca lowered her gaze, swallowing the knot in her throat. The humiliation was no longer hers. It had been passed, finally, to the one who deserved it. Jonathan's confidence had collapsed. When he returned to the stand that afternoon, he was no longer smug. His hands shook as he spoke, his eyes darted nervously between the judge and his attorney. I may have made some mistakes," he began, voice cracking. "My intention was never to mislead," the judge cut him off. "Enough. You've been caught in multiple lies under oath. The only thing you can offer now is transparency and cooperation. Anything less will be treated as contempt." His lawyer requested a recess, and it was granted. During the break, Rebecca waited outside the courtroom, hands in her coat pockets, staring at the city skyline through a narrow hallway window. Jonathan walked past her with lowered eyes, saying nothing. For the first time, she didn't feel invisible. She felt taller. Not because she had destroyed him, but because she had stood her ground when everything in her life was designed to make her kneel. When court resumed, the judge didn't wait. He ordered an immediate audit of Jonathan's businesses and imposed a freeze on all his known and suspected accounts. "Until we know the full scope of the deception, no funds shall be accessed or moved," he declared. Jonathan's lawyer didn't even argue. He knew it was over. Marissa leaned toward Rebecca and whispered, "He's going to be scrambling now." He never imagined this would reach this level. The judge concluded the session with firm words. "This court is appalled by the deliberate attempt to exploit legal processes and hide assets during divorce proceedings. We will reconvene after the forensic audit is complete." As the room cleared, Rebecca finally exhaled fully. Her hands were no longer shaking. Her eyes met those of people who had once pitied her. But now, they looked at her differently, not as a victim, but as a woman who refused to be erased. Over the following days, reports emerged that multiple of Jonathan's accounts had been frozen and several properties flagged for investigation. News of the court's actions spread quickly in business circles. One of his largest contracts was quietly terminated. Rebecca didn't rejoice, she simply kept moving forward. Her focus was now on the future, not on his collapse. At home, her daughter hugged her tighter that evening, sensing her mother's strength in a way she hadn't before. Marissa updated Rebecca with calm satisfaction. The auditor confirmed several offshore trusts under Jonathan's cousin's name. This will bolster the fraud charges. Rebecca nodded. I'm not surprised. I just didn't think he'd go this far to avoid responsibility. Marissa smiled gently. Men like him always think they're 10 steps ahead. But it only takes one steady step from someone underestimated to tip everything over. And Rebecca had taken that step over and over until the scales finally started to balance. One evening, a week before the final hearing, Rebecca received an unexpected email from Jonathan. It was short. We both made mistakes. You didn't have to go this far. You've made an enemy for life. There was no apology, no sign of remorse, only pride wounded by exposure. Rebecca stared at the screen, unbothered. For years, she had twisted herself trying to keep the peace. Now she realized, some people only feel powerful when others are afraid to speak. She didn't reply. There was nothing left to say. She shut the laptop and looked at her daughter sleeping peacefully in the next room. That silence was more important than any hollow message from a man who had spent years drowning her voice. In that moment, Rebecca knew she had already won, not just the case, but her own freedom from ever needing his approval again. In the final court session, the judge ruled firmly, full custody would be awarded to Rebecca. Jonathan's recent behavior, lies under oath, and disregard for legal transparency had painted a clear picture. His judgment and intentions toward parental responsibility are in question, the judge stated. Rebecca sat motionless, blinking away quiet tears. The words she had longed to hear were now real. She no longer had to fight to protect her daughter. The system had finally sided with truth. Jonathan's visitation rights were reduced to supervised visits, pending a psychological evaluation. His lawyer didn't object, there was no ground to stand on. As they exited the courtroom, Jonathan avoided Rebecca's eyes. The arrogance was gone. He walked with his shoulders low, a man finally forced to confront the consequences of his own design. Rebecca didn't look back. Her gaze was fixed ahead, on the life that waited for her and her daughter. Months passed. Rebecca found part-time work at a local nonprofit that supported women navigating divorce and financial abuse. What started as volunteering became a paid role. Her empathy, calm presence, and quiet strength resonated with others. She spoke not from theory, but lived experience. Each woman she helped reminded her of the pain she had endured and survived. The office walls carried silent stories, and she listened to each one with care. She had moved to a smaller home but made it theirs. Her daughter's laughter filled the kitchen now. They painted the walls together, adopted a rescue dog, and planted herbs on the windowsill. It was a modest life, but it was honest, peaceful, and theirs alone. One night, as they sat together folding laundry, her daughter looked up and said, "Mom, you smile more now." Rebecca paused, touched her daughter's cheek, and whispered, "That's because now we're safe." That fall, Rebecca was honored by the city's Women's Advocacy Coalition. They presented her with a small glass plaque and thanked her for turning silence into strength. She hadn't expected it. Standing at the podium, surrounded by survivors, advocates, and friends, she simply said, "The hardest thing I ever did wasn't leaving. It was staying quiet for so long. I speak now for the ones still afraid to." The room stood in applause, but Rebecca didn't feel proud. She felt humbled. Later, a woman approached her, eyes shining. "You don't know me. But your story helped me leave. I saw it in the local paper. It gave me courage." Rebecca hugged her quietly, the moment stretching beyond words. She had fought so hard just to survive. But now, her survival had become someone else's starting point. And that, more than any courtroom victory, made everything worth it. One quiet morning, months after the dust had settled, Rebecca found a letter in her mailbox. The handwriting was familiar. It was from Lila. Inside, a simple note read, "You changed my life, Rebecca." After testifying, I felt like I mattered for the first time in years. I left the city, started fresh. I even opened my own bookkeeping firm. You gave me the courage to begin again. Thank you. A soft smile spread across Rebecca's face. She folded the letter slowly and set it next to a framed photo of her and her daughter at the park. The past no longer haunted her, it had become the soil from which something new had grown. Not perfect. Not without scars. But real, whole, and hers. The storm she endured had finally cleared. And in its place, there was peace, not loud, not triumphant. Just quiet, steady peace. And that, she thought, was enough.